The 2000s gave us some of the sport's most legendary players, athletes who defied physics every time they touched the ball.
This is Reggie Bush to the corner, dive, and
It also gave us some of the game's most incredible moments, ones forever etched into our minds. But
he's going for the corner, he's got it!
But if we go all the way back to the year 2000, college football was transforming. Pass-happy offenses were lighting up scoreboards, rising contenders were challenging the old order, and a new system called the BCS was about to shake the sport to its core. Yet as we entered the year, the same powers from the 90s sat at the very top. Nebraska and Florida State, who had just won 5 national championships between them, came in at number 1 and number 2. Right on their heels sat Alabama, Wisconsin, and Miami, programs ready to snatch the throne right from their hands. September immediately gave us chaos at the top. UCLA stunned Alabama in their opening game, while fumbles cost the Hurricanes against the Washington Huskies. While these losses flung the door open for Michigan and Texas, that same feisty UCLA team would knock off Michigan, and an unranked Stanford team would shock the Longhorns on a last-minute touchdown. After a controversial last-second win over Tennessee, Florida inserted themselves back into the national spotlight, only to let up a 23-point fourth-quarter comeback to Mississippi State 2 weeks later. But the Oklahoma Sooners took the season by the horns, literally, on October 7th when they smashed 11th-ranked Texas 63-14. They followed that up by dropping 41 points on second-ranked Kansas State before dominating top-ranked Nebraska 31-14. On that same October day, 7th-ranked Miami upset top-ranked Florida State thanks to a missed field goal that sailed right for the third time in the rivalry's storied history. With both teams leading the AP poll late in the year, it seemed the path was set for a Hurricane Sooner national championship. But in the first of what would become many stunning decisions, the BCS leapfrogged Florida State over Miami, the team that had beaten them head-to-head. Miami would have to settle for the Sugar Bowl, where they'd beat up Florida as they plotted their revenge. Meanwhile, down in Miami, Florida State's explosive offense would go toe-to-toe with Oklahoma's stifling defense. Unfortunately for us, Chris Wanke and his Heisman-winning Seminole offense forgot to show up, getting shut out entirely, with Florida State only scoring 2 points thanks to a safety. In just his second year, Bob Stoops had climbed the mountaintop and returned the title back to Norman for the first time since 1985. But 2001 was all about who could match up with Miami. Being left out of the national championship had put a chip the size of a boulder on the shoulder of a team already overflowing with talent. Clinton Portis, Jeremy Shockey, and Ed Reed headlined a team that would go on to have 38 NFL draft picks, including 17 first-rounders. They immediately set the tone by blasting Penn State 33-7 in their season opener and overwhelming Rutgers 31-0. But before the season could truly get underway, the horrific events of September 11th brought everything to a halt. The sport paused for a week, and when play resumed, stadiums across the country became places of tribute, filled with flags, silence, and heartfelt honors for first responders and victims alike. As the game started back up, Miami kept rolling. They annihilated Florida State 49-27, and went on to not allow their opponent to score more than a touchdown in their next 5 games. Only Boston College and Virginia Tech really gave them scares, but clutch plays by their future Hall of Famer, Ed Reed, kept them undefeated and headed to the national championship. The question of who'd they play would unfold in late season chaos that still angers those out west to this day. At first, it looked like it'd be a Sugar Bowl rematch as Rex Grossman's Gators were lighting up the scoreboard, dropping 50 a game. Then came Auburn, who stunned them on a last-second field goal. Oklahoma capitalized on the opening by squeezing past Kansas State before stifling 5th-ranked Texas in a 14-3 slugfest. A few weeks later, they'd fall to Eric Crouch and his Cornhuskers with a win forever remembered for Crouch's Black 41 flash reverse touchdown that solidified his Heisman. But true chaos came on Thanksgiving week. On Black Friday, 14th-ranked Colorado shell-shocked second-ranked Nebraska 62-36. One day later, 4th-ranked Oklahoma got upset at home to a 4-6 Oklahoma State team. That left Florida and Texas in prime position, but they'd both fumble the opportunity. Florida falling 34-32 on a heartbreaker to Tennessee, while Texas was stunned by that soaring Colorado team in the Big 12 championship. Tennessee was now in pole position, but Nick Saban's LSU squad crushed their dreams in the SEC championship. The final AP poll had Oregon, the one-loss Pac-10 champs, in the second spot, followed by Colorado, the two-loss Big 12 champs. But for the second straight year, the BCS introduced controversy by choosing the lower-ranked Nebraska squad to leapfrog both teams and play Miami in the national championship. Oregon and Colorado, both heartbroken, would have to settle for the Fiesta Bowl in a game Joey Harrington would lead his Ducks to a 38-16 victory. 2 days later, Miami would put an exclamation point on what was one of the greatest seasons of all time by annihilating Nebraska 37-14 in a game that was over by halftime. The Hurricanes had their 5th national championship and the U was truly back. But 2002 would test if those Hurricanes could become an all-time dynasty. They had the talent. Ken Dorsey was back, flanked by NFL-level talent in Willis McGahee and Andre Johnson. The defense was just as scary, led by future Pro Bowlers in Jonathan Vilma, Antrell Roll, and Sean Taylor. To no surprise, they came in as the heavy favorite to win it all. And after dismantling 6th-ranked Florida in the swamp, it looked like the Canes were once again inevitable. But come October, we'd learn Miami was vulnerable, and other teams were positioning to take them out. For the second straight year, the start of October would go on to define the year. Florida State looked like they were going to upset Miami, but a McGahee screen pass ignited a fourth quarter comeback that was solidified by another missed field goal by the Seminoles, this time wide left. Out in Dallas, 3rd-ranked Texas once again stumbled versus Oklahoma as Chris Sims threw more picks than touchdowns for the second straight year. But this year, a trio of northern teams entered the conversation. Virginia Tech, even with losing Michael Vick to the NFL, was 3rd, while Notre Dame was reborn under new head coach Tyrone Willingham. However, on November 2nd, Hokies would get introduced to Larry Fitzgerald, and Notre Dame would turn the ball over 5 times in a heartbreaking loss to Boston College. With these losses, the path was cleared for a soaring Ohio State team that just could not be killed. Behind their freshman sensation, Maurice Clarett, and a top-ranked defense, the Buckeyes escaped one game after the next, and after a clutch fourth quarter drive to top Michigan, they were national title bound. With the Canes surviving scares from Pittsburgh and Virginia Tech, thanks to a historical season from McGahee, the matchup was set. Miami's explosive offense versus Ohio State's stifling defense. The Fiesta Bowl delivered and some. Miami struck first with a Roscoe Parrish touchdown, followed by an incredible Sean Taylor interception, but the Buckeye defense was relentless, forcing turnovers that would lead to a 14-7 halftime lead. That attitude carried into the second half, highlighted by arguably the play of the game when Clarett stripped Sean Taylor to steal back possession for the Buckeyes. Miami would rally behind McGahee, but their hopes seemed bleak after they lost him to a devastating knee injury. They'd do just enough to force overtime, setting the stage for one of the most controversial calls in the sport's history. After scoring first, Miami was seconds away from repeating and thought they sealed it after forcing a 4th down incompletion. As players ran onto the field, a late flag came flying, breathing new life into the Buckeyes. They would capitalize, scoring twice before winning on a goal line stand that ended the Hurricane dynasty and set up an Ohio State run of dominance that continues to this day. With that loss, the race was blown wide open in 2003. Miami was still loaded, but no longer immortal. Ohio State was now the hunted, and a pair of future Hall of Fame coaches, one out in Hollywood and the other down in Baton Rouge, were ready to take over the sport. But by October, it looked like the same players would fight for the title. Miami survived Florida and took out Florida State, while Oklahoma was once again dropping 50 a game and beating Texas, hanging 65 on them this year. On the other hand, Ohio State was barely hanging on, having survived scares against San Diego State and then Bowling Green. Their clock would strike midnight first on an 80-yard Lee Evans touchdown against Wisconsin. Turnovers and penalties would ultimately sink the Canes, who'd fall to Virginia Tech and then Tennessee in back-to-back weeks. Suddenly, the path was cleared for 2 one-loss teams to enter the conversation. After a 34-31 heartbreaker to Aaron Rodgers and his California Golden Bears, USC fought back into the title conversation on the back of their star quarterback, Matt Leinart. With a 43-16 statement over 6th-ranked Washington State, they were firmly behind Oklahoma as the 2nd-ranked team. Down south, Nick Saban's LSU squad had recovered from a slip-up against Florida to become the 3rd-ranked team by rallying off 6 straight wins. Then December 6th came and threw a bucket of chaos into the season that almost upended the entire BCS system. On that day, both LSU and USC took care of business, LSU beating Georgia to win the SEC, while USC steamrolled Oregon State. The pressure then fell on Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. Unfortunately for them, a 5'6" tornado named Darren Sproles would shock the Sooners, going for over 300 all-purpose yards in a massive 35-7 upset. With that loss, the title match match seemed obvious. The newly top-ranked Trojans against second-ranked LSU. But even with the loss, the BCS favored Oklahoma's strength of schedule over the Trojans. With both teams having one loss, the BCS made its most controversial decision yet by choosing the Sooners over the top-ranked Trojans to face LSU. Stunned, the Trojans would have to settle for the Rose Bowl against 4th-ranked Michigan, while LSU and Oklahoma faced off in the title game. With USC winning in convincing fashion, while LSU's top-ranked defense smothered the Sooners, the BCS had created the exact scenario it was designed to avoid, a split national championship. But unlike 2003, 2004 was a year of clarity. USC returned more powerful than ever. Matt Leinart was a preseason Heisman favorite. Lendell White and Reggie Bush created thunder and lightning in the backfield, and their defense was as menacing as ever. Meanwhile, Jason White was back leading the Sooners, while Saban was retooling down in Baton Rouge. But it would be new players from the South who'd shake things up. First was Auburn, who jumped up as a real contender after sliding past LSU 10-9 in a defensive battle. The second was Georgia, who avenged their SEC championship loss to LSU on the back of David Green's 5 touchdowns. But the very next week, the Bulldogs would fall to Tennessee for the first time in 5 years. The mighty Trojans would also stare defeat right in the face in back-to-back weeks, but would live to tell the tale. 3 rushing touchdowns from Reggie, Leinart, and White would allow them to escape Stanford before a clutch defensive performance helped them avenge their only loss to Aaron Rodgers from the year before. By the end of October, Miami looked like they were a serious contender. They had survived both Florida State and Louisville thanks to a pair of game-winning touchdowns from Frank Gore, but a seemingly easy win at Chapel Hill ended in nightmare fashion as North Carolina won on a walk-off field goal. From there on out, 2004 was a 3-way race to see who could stay perfect. Leinart had the Trojans rolling, averaging 250 yards a game on his way to a Heisman-winning season. Oklahoma was blitzing through the competition on the back of a terrifying freshman named Adrian Peterson, who'd come just short of being the first freshman to win the Heisman. And Auburn's 1-2 punch in Ronnie Brown and Cadillac Williams was doing just enough for their top-ranked defense to close out games. On December 4th, each team submitted their final resumes to the BCS. USC barely escaped a 6-4 UCLA team thanks to a 277-yard performance from Bush. Oklahoma flattened a 7-4 Colorado team in the Big 12 championship, and Auburn outlasted a 15th-ranked Tennessee team. All 3 had a case to make, but ultimately, the BCS would choose the proven contenders in Oklahoma and USC over Auburn's SEC championship. An infuriated Auburn squad would go on to handle Virginia Tech, while one day later, USC would annihilate Oklahoma 55-19. Add in Urban Meyer's historic Utah Utes undefeated season behind Alex Smith, and 2004 gave us 3 undefeated teams that all rightfully claimed to be champions. But for as good as USC was in 2004, they entered the stratosphere in 2005. Shocking the nation, Leinart passed up the NFL to chase history. Next to him stood again thunder and lightning, with Bush now primed to take over the sport. And defensively, the Trojans were reloading with 5 stars like Ray Malaluga and Brian Cushing. But legit challengers were building up across the country. Down south, Florida State teased contention after beating 9th-ranked Miami, only to flame out with 6 losses. Virginia Tech, now led by Marcus Vick, looked like they had recaptured his brother's magic, only to fall to Miami. And after beating those 3rd-ranked Hokies, Miami jumped back up into the top 3, only to stumble for the 2nd straight year to an unranked team, this time to Georgia Tech. Meanwhile, the SEC Giants were taking each other out. In his first year, Urban Meyer had his Gators ranked 5th until running into Alabama. After that win, Alabama climbed to number 4, but would lose in overtime heartbreaker to LSU. LSU would then enter the SEC championship as the 3rd-ranked team, but get blown out by DJ Shockley's Georgia Bulldogs. Up north, Penn State entered the conversation after upsetting the Buckeyes. But 1 week later, a Mario Manningham last-second touchdown would flip their dream season upside down. That same day, Notre Dame's promising 2005 season would fall to a similar fate. After a late Brady Quinn touchdown, they had USC on the ropes in a 4th and long. But a desperate Leinart heave to Dwayne Jarrett narrowly missed the defender's arm and gave the Trojans new life. A few plays later, the infamous Bush push capped USC's comeback win. After the scare, Reggie Bush made the Trojans borderline unbeatable on his way to the Heisman, putting on a 513-yard performance against Fresno State, followed by a 260-yarder against UCLA. But one team down in Austin did look capable of stacking up against USC. They were led by a 6'5 phenom who would transform into a full-blown superhero. After years of promise, Vince Young flipped the switch, leading his Longhorns past Ohio State and Columbus, snapping the 5-game losing streak against Oklahoma, and putting on otherworldly performances like his own 500-yarder against Oklahoma State. After demolishing Colorado 70-3 for the Big 12 championship, the collision course between the sport's biggest stars was set for Pasadena. Right out of the gate, Texas proved they were better than a touchdown underdog. In the first half, their defense would help them take a 16-10 lead into half, recovering a disastrous Bush fumble and forcing a Liner pick. But the USC Stars came out swinging in the second half. White punched in a pair of touchdowns, Bush added another, and when Liner connected with Jarrett to take a 38-26 lead late in the fourth, it seemed all but over. But 6 minutes was too much time for Superman. On the next drive, Young cut the lead to 5 on a 17-yard scramble. The Longhorn defense would step up next, stuffing White on a 4th and 2 to get Young the ball back. And on that final drive, destiny took over. On 4th down, with 19 seconds left, Young dashed towards the pylon and right into the history books. Texas had dethroned the Kings 41-38, and Young had put on a performance so transcendent it had the whole sport questioning if the Heisman went to the right guy. But 2006 felt like a total reset. With Liner, Bush, and Young off to the NFL, a chapter of college football superstardom had slammed shut. Yet a young freshman who had just arrived in Gainesville was about to go on a 3-year run that topped them all and start a run of SEC dominance. That man's name was Tim Tebow, and in 2006, while he was just a true freshman, he'd still make an immediate impact. It'd be Tebow who'd score all 3 of Florida's touchdowns, including his legendary jump pass and the Gators' 23-10 win over 9th-ranked LSU. That win shot them up to the 2nd-ranked team until Auburn handed them a temporary setback. That Auburn squad was talented, entering the year as a top 4 team, but run-ins with 2 all-time college greats, the first a 27-10 loss to Darren McFadden's Razorbacks, followed by a 37-15 loss to a freshman Matthew Stafford, derailed their year. McFadden would start his own legacy this year. He'd lead Arkansas to a top 5 ranking and finish 2nd for the Heisman with incredible performances like his 219 yards against South Carolina. Going into the final week of the year, they'd face off against the 4th-ranked Gators, who needed a win and chaos above them to make a bid for the title. Luckily for Florida, this was a year of chaos, starting in the Big East. West Virginia, powered by sophomore stars Pat White and Steve Slayton, rocketed up to the 3rd ranking before falling in a Thursday night thriller to Louisville. Potential Louisville title talk would only last 1 week as they'd lose on a game-winning field goal at Rutgers the following Thursday. In Big 12 country, Texas looked like an early favorite, but a freshman Colt McCoy couldn't quite fill Young's shoes. Oklahoma never really entered the picture, but will forever be remembered for their Fiesta Bowl game against Boise State. On a 4th and 18 with 18 seconds left, the Broncos hit a hook and ladder to tie the game up. Then in overtime, they executed a halfback pass, followed by the legendary Statue of Liberty play to shock the Sooners and show the nation smaller players could hang. But come the end of November, the real contenders were out west and up north. USC, even with their mid-season stumble against Oregon State, came back into the picture after smashing Oregon and California. Meanwhile, top-ranked Ohio State and 2nd-ranked Michigan were on a collision course for November 18th. In what would be billed the game of the century, Troy Smith would solidify his Heisman as he led the Buckeyes past Michigan 42-39. That win opened the door for USC to compete for 4 straight titles, but in their final game, they'd get stunned 13-9 by a 6-5 UCLA team. That same day, Florida, ranked 4th, would get a 160-yard performance from their other star freshman, Percy Harvin, to win the SEC championship. While many in the national media cried for a Michigan-Ohio State rematch, Florida's SEC win ultimately won them the bid to challenge Ohio State. To say their defense delivered would be an understatement. Outside of the opening kickoff from Ted Ginn, the Buckeyes were utterly dominated. Troy Smith was held to a net total of 6 yards as Urban raised his first Gators title and ushered in what would become an era of SEC dominance. But if we thought 2006 gave us chaos, 2007 rewrote the word's definition. Upsets came every weekend, rankings flipped overnight, and by the end of September, we'd be marching into a year that would earn the nickname the Curse of Number 2. At first, Florida seemed poised to take over. Tim Tebow immediately made a statement with a 4-touchdown performance in a 59-20 blowout over Tennessee. That game would preview what would become one of the most remarkable individual seasons in college football history. 4,000 yards of offense, 55 touchdowns, and the first Heisman ever won by a sophomore. But despite Tebow's brilliance, the Gators season would get derailed by a last-second loss to Auburn and a fourth-quarter collapse at LSU. The real story of 2007 was incomprehensible chaos that started on day one in the Big House. In one of the greatest upsets in college football history, 33-point underdog Appalachian State dropped 34 points and blocked a potential game-tying field goal to stun the Wolverines and the nation. From there, the sport descended into total mayhem. On October 6th, an unranked Stanford squad led by Jim Harbaugh marched into the Coliseum as 41-point underdogs and shocked number 2 USC. A week later, top-ranked LSU would lose at Kentucky in a triple overtime thriller. Only a few hours later, with fans chanting, "We're number 1," second-ranked California would fumble their opportunity to become the top-ranked team with a 31-28 home loss to Oregon State. The chaos would not let up as the very next Thursday, number 2 South Florida, coming off their meteoric rise, would fall in another Thursday night Big East Classic at Rutgers. Come early November, Boston College would be the next second-ranked team to fall as Matt Ryan's comeback bid against Florida State fell on a pick 6. Number 1 teams weren't immune either, as Juice Williams went into Columbus and upset the Buckeyes 28-21. 5 days later, second-ranked Oregon would watch their dream season die as they lost Dennis Dixon to an ACL injury and their title hopes to Arizona. But the chaos reached its peak over Thanksgiving weekend, starting in Baton Rouge. On Black Friday, Darren McFadden would get his revenge for last year by putting together a 206-yard, 4-touchdown masterpiece that earned Arkansas a 50-48 triple overtime win over top-ranked LSU. One day later, number 2 Kansas, the year's biggest surprise, got shredded by Missouri's Chase Daniel for 361 yards and 3 scores. But Missouri too would fall into the madness on championship weekend. The Tigers, who were now the top-ranked team, got overwhelmed by 9th-ranked Oklahoma, fumbling their chance at the title. They wouldn't be the only heartbroken team, as that very same day, 2nd-ranked West Virginia suffered the most painful loss in school history with their 13-9 collapse to rival Pittsburgh. When the dust finally settled, it'd be Ohio State, a team who was ranked 7th when they last played, and LSU, the 2-loss SEC champs, who'd benefit from the chaos and square off in the national title. In back-to-back years, the SEC talent was just too much for the Buckeyes, as LSU would force 3 turnovers and block a kick in a 38-24 win, giving them their second national title in 5 years and cementing the SEC's reign at the top. But in 2008, the waters settled and we got some clarity. Florida had the sport's biggest star, Oklahoma had the nation's most explosive offense, and Texas was back in the chase. The season kicked off with Georgia atop the polls behind Matthew Stafford and no Sean Moreno. Ohio State opened at number 2 with another stacked roster and a freshman phenom named Terrell Pryor. USC lurked close behind with an NFL-level defense. To close out the top 5, we had Oklahoma led by sophomore standout Sam Bradford and Florida with the returning Heisman winner. September immediately tore through that order with USC overwhelming Ohio State 35-3. With 5-star Mark Sanchez and the nation's top defense, USC looked like they'd reclaimed their former glory. But on a September Thursday night in Corvallis, Jacquizz Rodgers would gash them for over 200 yards in an upset that would haunt them the rest of the season. That same weekend, the SEC was shaken loose. In Gainesville, Florida was stunned 31-30 by Ole Miss despite 268 total yards from Percy Harvin. But this only lit a fuse as Tebow delivered his legendary promise speech shortly after. Only a few hours later, Alabama walked into Georgia's blackout and blew the doors off the Bulldogs. Texas followed that up by taking down top-ranked Oklahoma in an instant classic, claiming the number 1 spot for themselves. But by the start of November, thrillers would shake up the top 3, starting in Lubbock, Texas. On November 1st, top-ranked Texas visited Mike Leach's undefeated Texas Tech squad, and the two put together an all-time classic. After a wild back-and-forth game, it would come down to the last play as Michael Crabtree caught a sideline pass, shed a tackle, and tight-roped into the end zone for the game-winning touchdown. 1 week later, third-ranked Penn State who had soared up the rankings after beating Ohio State and Columbus, lost on a heartbreaking game-winning field goal against Iowa. That put Alabama and Texas Tech on a collision course. That is until Texas Tech ran into an Oklahoma Sooner buzzsaw, losing 65-21. After dropping 60 points in their next two games, including in their controversial Big 12 championship appearance, where the BCS chose them over Texas, the team who had beaten them, the Heisman Trophy was Sam Bradford's, and the Sooners were title-bound for the fourth time in 9 years. The other spot would get decided in a 1-2 SEC championship heavyweight fight between Alabama and Florida. Ultimately, Tebow would take over late, making critical plays down the stretch to earn his second SEC championship. The national championship brought two Heisman winners and the sport's most explosive offense versus its most complete team. But what we got was a defensive battle that's tone was set on the third play of the game when Major Wright went right through Manuel Johnson's chest. There'd only be 2 touchdowns in the first half, and by the fourth, Florida had just a slight 17-14 lead. But just then, the Gators separated themselves with an Ahmad Black pick followed by a Tebow touchdown, winning their second title in 3 years and officially becoming the sport's new dynasty. But the final year of the 2000s would have arguably the biggest impact on the next decade. It would start in historic fashion with both prior Heisman winners, Tebow and Bradford, returning for the first time since 1946. And it would end in a historic fashion, as 6 undefeated teams would create the most noise for a playoff yet. But entering the year, the picture seemed as clear as ever. Florida opened as the top-ranked team, armed with Tebow and a veteran defense. Colt McCoy had Texas in the second slot, while Bradford had Oklahoma close behind. USC, now led by star freshman Matt Barkley, and Alabama, fueled by Saban's smothering defense, rounded out the top 5. The field looked stacked for a season-long SEC and Big 12 duel, but week 1 would hit Oklahoma like a sledgehammer, as they'd get upset to BYU and lose Bradford to a shoulder injury. USC would beat Ohio State in back-to-back years, but lose to Washington the next week, a loss that was the start of the end for Carroll at USC, who'd end the year with a 55-21 blowout loss to Jim Harbaugh's Stanford Cardinals that fueled their future NFL rivalry. Instead of USC, it'd be a different team out west making noise early in the year, that team being Boise State when they took down Oregon 19-8 in a game remembered for LeGarrette Blount's infamous post-game punch. Down south, the Big Three were cruising. After a hard-fought 13-3 win over 4th-ranked LSU, Florida was taking out one SEC team after the next. Saban's Crimson Tide combined a ferocious defense with offensive stars in Mark Ingram, Trent Richardson, and Julio Jones, while Colt McCoy had Texas dropping 40 a game. But it wasn't always easy going. On the same day Florida would need a game-winning field goal against Arkansas, Texas would need 5 turnovers to survive Oklahoma. 1 week later, Terrence Cody's blocked field goal against Tennessee saved Alabama's season. Nipping on these Giants' heels were outsiders that kept stacking wins. Andy Dalton had TCU up to the 4th spot after beating Clemson on the road, smashing number 16 BYU 38-7, and then dropping 55 on 16th-ranked Utah. Brian Kelly's Cincinnati Bearcats were right behind them, having gone undefeated, including a come-from-behind win to beat Pitt. And then there was Boise State, who obliterated their schedule after that tough Oregon win. By December, 6 undefeated teams were all crying for a shot at the title. But in 2009, Cinderella had no chance to take a spot from undefeated Blue Bloods. Texas secured the first spot by barely escaping the unblockable Ndamukong Suh in the Big 12 championship. The second spot would go to the winner of the long-awaited Florida-Alabama SEC rematch. This time, Alabama's defense smothered Tebow, and Ingram gashed the Gators for nearly 200 yards on his way to the Heisman Trophy. Tebow would end his storied career with a dominating 533-yard performance to beat Cincinnati 51-24, while a late Doug Martin touchdown gave Boise State the edge over TCU in the Fiesta Bowl. As for the national championship in Pasadena, what was supposed to be a close game instantly changed when Colt McCoy was knocked out on the opening drive. Freshman Garrett Gilbert mounted a valiant second-half rally, trimming a 24-6 deficit to only 3 points, but late turnovers sealed Texas' fate as Ingram and Trent Richardson powered the Tide to a 37-21 win. The Saban era had officially arrived, and the BCS had its loudest critics yet, as 3 undefeated outsiders were shut out of the picture entirely, the clearest sign that change had to happen. Thanks for reliving the 2000s with me. If you enjoyed this video, I think you'll like this next one too.